Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Quaker Libertarian Conversations. This is Matt Hisrich, founder of Quaker Libertarians, and I'm here once again with Juliet Nail and Jared Warner. We are here today to have a little conversation about John. Let's kick it off after a moment of centering. So Juliet, you had an idea for a conversation. I'd love to hear a little bit about it.
All right, here we go. So we're going to start off with the response that Jesus has to Thomas in John 14. It's like 1 through 6. But basically his response is, he's asking, like, how do we know where you're going? How can we know the way? And Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one gets to my Father but through me. So this is kind of a controversial phrase, but when I look at this, I look at it and see, oh, Christ is the way, we have to be like Christ. Okay, so Quaker query, how do we do that? How do we be the way, right? It's how do we be the way in our times are turbulent right now? How do we stay peaceful? How do we stay in love? Like, how do we do that? So I am lost. How do we do it? You guys have the answers, right?
Uh-oh.
Matt might have the answers. I don't know if I have the answers, but
we were counting on you, Jared.
There's plenty of answers around there. So yeah, how can we live in the way or be examples of the way when everything around us is kind of turbulent, crazy, protests going on everywhere? There's a lot of things in the news that gets a lot of people either excited or upset or any of that. And I think that is something to sit and think about. And as Quakers, we like to think about things like that. How am I living an example in my life? So if it's okay, I'll read John 14, 1 through 7. Is that okay?
Great.
Yeah, we probably need it all in context.
All right, so this is a conversation that Jesus is having with his disciples. And he says, let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I am going. Thomas says to him, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do know him, and have seen him. So that's all the way from 14:1 through verse 7. So.
And back to Juliet, the question is, okay, well, that all sounds good, but how do we actually do this? What is the way? How do we live it? How do we figure all that out? And do so in the midst of what are some wild times with global pandemics and election madness and everything else that's going on in the world. How do we do this? We have thoughts? Or do we just we give up?
No giving up. No giving up. I mean, I look at I know what I try to do, right? I mean, that's kind of why the whole point of being a Quaker, you know, I try to go to meeting, or I try to I really have a hard time with the quiet practice by myself or even on a Zoom call. So like I personally am really struggling with my current Quaker practice because we're on Zoom. And I like sitting in silence over Zoom just seems kind of silly to me. It's a little different. Like I kind of actually get more out of our little 1 minute of silence than I do like the whole hour. But so how can I make that up? I don't know. Do I spend more time in nature? Do I spend more time in some sort of other meditation that has more ritual? But somehow for me, I have to keep centering myself, cleaning house, cooking a meal, digging my garden. I don't know if they're useful ways, but they do kind of get me a little centered. And then sometimes I'll know the right thing to do, but I don't know. You guys are supposed to have the answers.
I think that first verse is kind of where we start, because what Juliet was saying about she's struggling getting centered through all of this, that is very much a real thing. Mm-hmm. It is a struggle because, I mean, just this week we had church meetings for our church here, and questions about, do we continue to wear masks, stuff like that, and everybody has their opinion. Everybody wants their opinion to be heard. It goes back to that. I think in verse 1, Jesus is trying to call his disciples back to the center. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. And he's just kind of saying, hey, take a breath, slow down. Don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't look at everything going on in the world and let that control who you are. Take a breath, go out to your garden and dig for a while and just let it stew and work itself out. And he's telling his disciples this, and part of what a disciple is they follow their teacher around. They don't just listen, but they actually walk where he walks, and they eat the same food. They live in the same general area, and they live life with their teacher and do what he tells them to do. And then he gives them a little free rein to try it for themselves. And then they come back and re-center again. So I think he's beginning this whole discussion. You're getting kind of excited. Let's don't let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God first. Believe also in me. So what have I done? And Jesus is asking them to remember, what have we done before this? And where have we been? And I think that's important to think about. Where have we experienced trouble before, and how did we get through it? And then look forward into the future, because there is a future. No matter what we may think it is, something's going to happen. And where are we going to be in that? Are we going to be struck with fear and unable to do anything, or are we going to go out with the strength and hope that our faith gives us, whatever that faith is? So I don't want to dominate the conversation totally. I'm a preacher. You give me a Bible verse, I'm going to talk for an hour. So
what I got there is faith. It's just whatever that faith is, let go and surrender.
That's part of it, definitely. And then believe in God, believe also in me. So there's more. Belief is, I like to explain it. There's different levels of belief. There's the head knowledge of belief, where, yeah, I know something, so I believe it. And then there's the trust aspect of belief. Like, I believe this, so I'm going to give my life over to it. And then there's the entrusting part of belief, where you're fully engaged in that. That is who you are. You aren't separated from that. So a lot of people like to say you believe in a chair, so you put your faith in a chair that it's going to work for you. It's a cliche type of example, but it kind of works because that's the second level of belief. I know that a chair is supposed to hold me. I don't actually live it until I sit in the chair. And you don't fully entrust your life to that chair until you relax and let it hold all your weight. So I think that's part of what he's saying is, you have this head knowledge of me, but you've also walked with me. So what have we done? And how does that apply in the future?
I don't remember the exact count. I do remember hearing a message at some point where it was pointed out how many times in Scripture it says, "Do not be afraid," and that this outcounts many, many, many other commandments or statements or whatever in the text. And I think part of what we're getting here is that sentiment of how do you be if when everybody else is panicked about this or that or the other, because there's a lot to be worried about, right? How can you be that grounded and centered person in that conversation or in that space such that you can help people discern what the next step is? You may not have, sorry, Juliet, all the answers to give, but you may be able to create the space where somebody else can arrive at the answer by having everybody step back and pause. I thought, so we had been talking a little bit before we started the official call, and Jared had indicated one perspective, which I thought was interesting, and perhaps you could shed some light on, that prior to this passage, what Jesus is doing is giving us examples of, okay, here is how I have shown you the way by how I interact with other people in various contexts. So when you're saying, look back at what we've done, we've seen that. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Okay, so basically the first miracle that Jesus has is in chapter 2. And he's at a wedding and they run out of wine. And Jesus's mom actually comes up to him and says, "Hey, they ran out of wine." And he's like, "What's that have to do with me?" And he's kind of sassing his mom. I don't know if Mary slapped him or not, but she turns to everyone around and says, "Do whatever he says," and she walks away. And the rest of the story is Jesus tells the people there that are serving to go fill up water jugs with water, and then to take a cup full out and hand it to the master of the ceremony, so to speak, and the water turned to wine. So that's the very first public interaction with the disciples and Jesus in John chapter 2. And it's not a very Christian context. He's at a party. So, which is very interesting. So the first public thing that he does with his disciples is to make sure that the celebration goes on. And I think that is part of what's most important here is, yes, we can do things individually to center, but we do things for a reason and a purpose. And that is to encourage those around us. So I might be a pastor, I might be a Quaker, I might be a libertarian, I might be somebody that works at a retail store, I might be the cook at school. How am I encouraging in a community context and making sure that everybody around me understands that there's a lot more to life than just that singular struggle that I'm dealing with right now? And how can I get involved in somebody else's life enough where I take some sort of interest in what they're doing and dealing with and encouraging them through that? So the reality is if they ran out of wine, the party was going to stop. And there's a potential that this family would be shamed in the community because they didn't throw a good enough celebration. So Jesus is right there with them, understanding, hey, this is a really important time, not just for the new family, but also the existing family. And it's going to shed light on their entire future if they can't throw a good feast. So he wouldn't let that happen. Excuse me, he wouldn't let that happen. So, and I think that's really important. We have to take an interest in others and make sure we encourage. And that's part of the way that we began off with. So anything else that anyone else wants to add? Like I said, this is a verse in the Bible, so I'll preach for an hour on it. So,
well, so just to summarize, so far, here's the answers I'm getting. So yeah, one, okay, we do have to center and, figure out how do we call the divine into our own life, right? Whether that's the garden, whether it's Quaker meeting, whatever, mass, whatever your thing is, the Bible, whatever. But that's not enough. There's the, so if this is his first miracle, so that seems to point to our way is is that we have to contribute to our community. And like you said, like tuning in to other people's needs and desires and figuring out how do we fill the gap where there's a missing piece, how do we help with that? And I kind of like the idea that celebration and communal celebrations the answer. Like maybe we just need to have more fun together.
I think that's a very good takeaway from there is we don't have enough fun sometimes, and COVID's kind of made it a little harder to do that. But yeah, we have to give ourselves excuses to have fun sometimes.
So my next question is for both of you is how do you pull, and it's related. So that's kind of the Christian or the Quaker piece, but the libertarian piece, I don't hear that Mary saying, hey, go get the tribunals or the Pharisees or the government to give them wine, right? Or whatever. I mean, I'm just, what is, so how do we bring in that unique libertarian piece, which I don't know that we see it as unique, but.
Yeah, I would say, so there's a couple things to pull out there. One that I think Jared is really drawing forward very helpfully is to say, part of that way is to be other directed, to be community focused, to think about what can you contribute that helps people where they are and in the context they're in. And that's exactly what Jesus was doing there. And that community piece, I think this grows right out of Quaker practice, right? Like the whole question of can you be a Quaker on your own? Well, I think to some extent, but there's such a power to being in community and having that communal discernment, whether that's at a monthly meeting, yearly meeting, whatever, those coming together to experience spirit together, to experience the divine together is powerful. It's important. It's not just you with scripture or you in a room alone. Those practices can be important and life-giving, but that's not the whole picture. That some of that even individual discernment comes as you engage with community. Now, I think, and not all libertarians would be comfortable with this, right? But that can involve submission to whatever that community decides is important for how to live. And but the important piece there from a libertarian perspective is it's voluntary submission. You are entering into covenant or relationship with the community, and you are abiding by what they just say. You may not always agree with that, right? But you come into unity with whatever that larger group is. Where I think some Quakers may have gone astray is to say, we can apply that same community discernment model and following the leading of the Spirit to democratic elections and we basically have come up with whatever we've discerned is the way, and say we've discerned the way, and if 49% of the rest of the country doesn't agree that that's the way, we have the majority. And so something that is very uncomfortable at a monthly meeting, where we say, no, we want to reach consensus, we want to make sure everybody is comfortable moving in the same direction, we sort of set that aside. In the political sphere, it's almost like a two kingdoms theology, which other denominations embrace, but Quakers have never been comfortable with, and yet we don't like to talk about it as much, that we are essentially imposing our will through the state. And so that's where I think if we are at least asking that question of how do we live the way, maybe it has political implications too, not just personal or meeting implications.
Matt, can you go a little deeper into that? Because people who are non-Quakers, because this actually is part of what really led me to becoming a libertarian, or to at least accepting it more deeply, was the Quaker model of consensus, and that desire, and not just desire, the demand to address the concerns of the 49%, or even the one. I mean, it's like the Senate's ability to filibuster. A Quaker business meeting, and anyone can attend, attenders or members can attend that monthly business meeting, and anyone can stop any decision. So I think a lot of non-Quakers don't understand that. So Quaker decisions are voluntary. And they are meeting that, it is voluntary because you're entering into it, right? You can agree to step aside, but you're never going to agree to step aside unless the meeting has really shown a due diligence in trying to address your concern, right? So yeah, so I don't know, is there more there that we need to go to, or no?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and that's one of the challenges I think we're going to wrestle with throughout the videos as we have these conversations. To what extent people are already familiar with all these concepts, and to what extent do we have to help explain them? But yeah, so business practice among friends, this varies widely depending on what meeting you are in, what monthly meeting you are in. But generally, I think there is a sense that it's not a voting structure. It's a structure, like Robert's Rules of Order is practiced in many congregations and denominations, but among friends, a sense that while it may not be unanimous decision making, there is a sense of unity, and that the clerk of the meeting works to wrestle with whatever voices are at the table, and they may not be in 100% agreement about this is absolutely the way I think we need to go, but they come to some shared sense, even if there is disagreement, that the meeting is ready to move forward in a sense of unity. We're not going to bring it up again after the decision's been made and say, oh, we told you this wasn't going to work, that kind of thing. In a way that in denominations and congregations where you do vote, okay, it's the majority decided this and we're moving forward. The Quakers tend to try to hear all the voices on the table. Others, you may both have experience in your meetings of how this actually plays out. It's not always perfect.
No, it's not always perfect, and it can sometimes take a long time for decisions to be made. But generally, if everyone present is seeking that unity, they are comfortable no matter which way the decision goes. And they will step aside and say, this doesn't matter enough. To me personally, it's better for the community, so I'm going to step aside. I know there is an example in one of the churches that I attended before I came here to Kansas City. Was they had a daycare that they opened up in the meeting, and there's some people that were really opposed to having a daycare, and they decided that they would step aside because they saw that those that wanted the daycare really had a good plan, and they were really on board with it, and they were like, okay, I'll step aside and we can maybe look at it in 5 years or something and see how it's going. And after they stepped aside and allowed the meeting to move forward without opposition necessarily. They were the biggest supporters of that daycare because they saw how much it was doing and how good it was for the community and that sort of thing. So even you don't have to be in 100% agreement, but you have to be willing to let the meeting do what they feel is important and not oppose moving forward necessarily. So, you know, a lot of people in my discussions that I have around the break room and stuff like that, they will look at the current political situations and they're like, we can't ever get anything to go. We don't have any decisions. Everybody's so divided. I'm like, it's not a bad thing necessarily. We need time to actually discuss it and think it through. And hopefully at the end of the day, or at the end of the age, however long it is, we'll actually have a decision that makes more sense. And the rules in the Senate and the rules in the House are set up to give space for that. You know, I'm not ready to move forward yet. Let's give some more time to think about it. And sometimes it's used as a weapon, but it is actually there to allow space so people can make a better decision. At least that's what I assume is going on. But I may be looking at all of that through a Quaker lens and seeing the amount of space as a positive thing because it is helpful for me in my meeting as well as how I grew up. So taking a long time to make a decision is okay with me as long as you make the right decision. So.
Well, so what I'm hearing is that the Quaker process gives us how to implement voluntary solutions, or when there's a conflict, when there's it gives us Quaker process gives us a structure, and part of that process demands a respect for unity or a desire for unity. So maybe we have to look at, does it make sense that we would have unity of decision over 360 million people, but that these decisions need to move to a smaller realm that people can decide on, that can't come to some sort of consensus or stepping aside voluntarily?
I would see it that way, and to say, I think some friends might say, well, obviously you can't have, and even in any kind of secular context, you can't have a spirit-led decision the way that you can in a meeting, and so we're just going to set that aside. What I think you can do, though, is adopt that model to the extent that you can, and say, okay, let's reduce the amount that we're following a model that we fundamentally disagree with about how decisions are made, of imposing our will on the minority, whatever that decision is and whatever that minority majority mix is, that we reduce the scope of those areas that we have to engage in that, and we seek out ways to build voluntary decisions and smaller decisions that can be made more voluntary than on a national or international scale. So yes, that all aligns very well. I didn't know where we were going to go when we started talking about the way. I'm sure we could talk more about it, and perhaps we will, but I think we're at the end of our half hour for today. Any final words from either of you?
I would have to say that you can do this in a secular situation. I was a manager at one point in time in my careers, and I would not just, the way I manage is how I live my life as a Quaker. So I would get the input from everyone that I was managing, what they thought, and then I'd ask questions, what do you think we should do? And listen to all the input coming in, because knowledge is very close to the center of who we are. If Dallas Willard says that the soul's built of different levels and the heart is at the center And right outside the heart is your knowledge and your mind and your emotions. So those are the closest things that influence your heart. So what you have in your head and how you're feeling that day. So if there are concerns, you can voice those concerns, and you can answer questions, and you can then ask questions and let people give feedback, and then come to some sort of consensus on how are we going to approach the next month in a business sense through that. And to be honest, it's worked well for me as a manager. It may not be what the company wants done, and it may take a little longer to do it, but once we came to that decision together, we were fully on board and going above and beyond what the company had expected us to do. So yes, it's definitely a spiritual thing for me, but it does have secular aspects because it gives space for people to speak their mind, express their emotions, and present some of the research and study that is going on out there. So yeah, I think it is a good way. But I'm a Quaker, so of course I would say that. But but I also think that it gives us space to libertarianism is about volunteering to fulfill the needs of the community. If there is a need in the community, if people don't realize that it's a need, how are they going to answer that need? Everybody brings up, how are we going to take care of roads? Well, most people don't realize that probably a good percentage of the roads in any city are actually private. They're not public. The road going outside the store that I work in isn't owned by the city. It's owned by whoever built the house or the industrial complex that those businesses are in. They have to maintain the road. The reason they put that road in was because they wanted their business to succeed. So there are voluntary ways of doing things that provide more for the community, and as well as for the business themselves. So I think that libertarianism does have some options and some answers to what's going on. I just think we're not asking enough questions. And if you don't ask the right questions or enough questions, then you come up with a bad answer.
So who will build the roads? Perhaps a topic for a future video.
That may have to be next now.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for joining. We will see you next time.
Thank you all. Bye.